All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It is good to be with you all here. Hope you can hear and see me as well as you can. Let me start off our time with prayer, and then we'll jump into this time together. Lord, we thank you for another day that you've given us life. We honor you for who you are, for your constant faithfulness towards us. Thank you for your Holy Spirit that your word says lives and resides within us, that we are emboldened to reflect you in the world in which we exist. Pray that we would do that. I pray that we would learn from you as we dive further into Job today, that our hearts and our minds have been stirred to see humanity in the midst of suffering and your presence in the midst of suffering. And that though complicated, conflicting, frustrating, the life in which we live, Lord, is a life in which you live with us. So we pray that we will see that in this moment today. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, chapter 3. We covered chapters 1 and 2 on last Sunday, really laying out the saga that's before us today. And now we are stepping into the breaking of the silence that Job has had for 7 days and 7 nights. We ended last week with chapter 2 with his friends coming. We have not heard from his friends yet. So we're still in the midst of their silence. But in this time, we hear Job break his silence, and it's profound in what he says when he finally speaks. I want to take a moment and ask you, I'll give a minute just to think. When you think of your own moments of suffering, if you say you have suffered, a few weeks ago, I asked you to name what would an image or a statement when you say suffering. Now I'm asking you, as we've jumped into hearing Job, seeing Job, experiencing Job in suffering, when you think of your own suffering, our own moments of suffering, what's a word that framed the state of your heart? I'll say that again. In moments of suffering, when you experience suffering, and if you say, I haven't experienced suffering before, maybe you're the friend of Job and you've sat alongside someone who's experienced suffering. But I want you to think primarily about a moment of your own personal suffering. You don't have to describe it. What's one word to describe the frame or the state of your heart? Let me give you a moment to think about that.
Humble.
Humbled. Okay, I'm going to write that down. Humbled. Okay.
Weary.
What was that, buddy?
Weariness or weary.
Weariness.
Hey, George.
I heard someone else.
AJ had to take
Hang
a
on just a
call.
minute.
There's been a death in the family. Let me silence his phone, his iPad here. Mute him.
Anyone else?
Here we go.
I believe you're muted.
Okay.
There we go.
I would say frightened.
Right. Okay. Right. Isaac, any word to describe? Would you both say that? Frightened? Okay. Humbled. Weary. Frightened. Humbled, weary, frightened. I think those are good descriptors because they're your own personal descriptors, right? I cannot cannot describe how you feel in the midst of suffering. I think it's helpful for us to think about that when we dive into what Job will state about his own darkness. A few things I want to lift out that I saw experience through this as I did my first read of the text. Job opened his mouth, and what was the first thing that he did when he opened his mouth? He cursed the day of his birth. It's pretty strong. There's a depth of despair that's laid out by Job. Job cursed the day of his birth. Let the day perish in which I was born. Let the day perish in which I was born. Let doom and deep darkness claim it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. These are the things that the themes that Job brings to mind when he begins to speak. Darkness is mentioned at least 4 times in this chapter. Darkness is mentioned in verse 4, verse 5, verse 6, and verse 9. It gives us a picture that Job, in his despair, is in a deep chasm of darkness. Job has been stirring in silence. But what I think we all can say is that verbal silence is not mental silence. It's not spiritual silence. It's not a holistic silence. A lot of times when human beings face silence, it is the most suffering moments of their lives. Most of us could attest at times that silence is the scariest thing to experience as a human. Because in that silence, the thoughts of our heart speak loudly. When we're busy and when we are preoccupied with other people's thoughts and other people's words and other people's interactions and the movement around the world around us, we could fail to see or hear our own thoughts. So think about 7 days and 7 nights of Job saying absolutely nothing. And think about a night in which you had a silent moment, or maybe 30 minutes of silence. Think about that for a moment. It's odd and rare to even have that much time of deafening silence. I could imagine, at least for myself, that there are many thoughts that come to my mind when no other noise is around me. And I have a tendency, I don't know if you have this tendency, to ruminate over thoughts, for thoughts to stick in my brain, and for me to interrogate those thoughts, process through those thoughts, ask questions of those thoughts, and spend a lot of time there. So I myself am not prone to draw towards silence. So raise your hands. Do you enjoy silence?
Actually,
Good. I think that's a gift. Enjoy silence. It's a gift that people rarely, I think, exercise. Exercise silence. In other words, I can't do that in this moment at teaching. My responsibility is to speak and not shut my mouth. But I have found that the practice of silence is one of the most formative spiritual disciplines in my life. To shut up, just be quiet, Daniel, and get away from people that won't let you shut up, which means you have to leave certain settings. It doesn't speak to the person. It doesn't speak to the environment. It's a practice. It's a discipline. So I think even something that we can learn about grief from Job is that somehow Job knew he needed to be quiet. Maybe he was experiencing such a depth of suffering that he could not speak. However, the example that we see here is that 7 full nights, or rather 7 full days and nights, Job is in utter silence, according to the text. But then when he opens his mouth with quite a bit of despair. Right? I don't know if I would curse the day that I was born. Job questions, he brings into question the state of his existence. Why do you think this matters? Why do you think he says this? And you are free to share. Why do you think this matters? Why do you think he says something so shocking? God, why do I even exist? Essentially, is what Job says.
You're muted.
To me, that's an indication that death and suicide would be better than trying to or figuring out how to deal with his current situation and his loss. The loss that he had, I can't imagine. I've definitely not experienced anything like that in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. The deepness of despair, right? In one sense, outside of his wife, he has lost everything. Right? And his wife doesn't seem to be the greatest advocate in the moment.
No.
Right. And so in some sense, he's lost his wife in terms of the proximity towards this moment of grief. So in one sense, Job is by himself in this despair to what I think you're naming. And it seems as if life doesn't matter. Right. And that there's something to be said about when silence happens in the midst of grief. Despair can be beyond what we feel we can hold. That we cannot contain the depth of grief that we have experienced. So there's this shock, there's this bewilderment, there's this confusion. And even within our study guide, there is this sense of a psychological crisis, right? That Job is in a psychological crisis, a deep feeling of despair, emptiness, loss, fear, mourning. All these things are combined to a moment where it feels as if his humanity cannot contain the grief that is present. This whole time, right, differently to Job 1 and 2, to the first two chapters, there is no dialogue between two individuals. It is a monologue, the entire chapter, right? Excuse me. We start off with, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth, and Job said, "Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived." He walks through this entire passage wrestling with his own thoughts, his own experiences, his own pains. Deeply troubled by the experience of suffering. And there's a sense that when the right time came, Job spoke. The right time came, Job spoke. And when he spoke in a way of destruction of self and destruction of the life that's around him. Let the day perish which I was born, and the night that said a man child is conceived. Never again would that be a day of joy and celebration for him. He immerses himself in a season, a place of darkness, utter darkness. And it almost seems that it is a foreshadowing back to Genesis 1 and 2. Right? Genesis 1 and 2, darkness is assumed to be that of chaos. If you go to the creation story of Genesis 1 and 2, there's the darkness is kind of seen as a chaotic place. So Job almost seems to suggest that instead of being in a place of light, he'd rather go to a place of chaos because his experience is that of chaos. And his association with chaos is utter darkness, right? Utter destruction. God's first words, what are God's first words in the creation story of Genesis 1? God speaks, and then what does he say in Genesis 1?
Let there be light.
Let there be light. Yep. He does declare that it's good, but he says, let there be light. What does Job say? Let there be dark.
Ark. Mhm.
So there's a play of words there, right? Because it ties back to what he first said. At the very end of creation, God creates humankind and declares that humankind is good, and not just good, right? But he declares it good above all the rest of creation. Now Job declares the death of himself, and almost in sense of like, I want to undo what God has declared as good, because everything around me I see is no longer good. God says, let there be light, which allegorically, metaphorically has meant let there be order brought into chaos. Job, in the other sense, it says there was order and chaos was brought. Let me go back to the thing that is utter darkness. It's a good play. The other thing that we talk about here is we see this chaos also associated with another biblical creature that we see, the Leviathan. Job mentions the Leviathan in his dialogue to suggest utter chaos begets utter chaos, right? Like there's this double entendre that Job does throughout the text, like to further reinforce, I am in the depths of despair. If you can't understand chaos and darkness and creation, let me give you another example. I'm in chaos. If you don't understand it, let me say it again. I'm in chaos. I'm in darkness. I'm in darkness. I'm in darkness. And I don't know if you've been here, when you're in grief, you ruminate over the chaos. Especially if something traumatic happens, you're deciphering when your brain is trying to process something that you cannot answer. How do you answer seven kids being killed? How do you answer all your cattle being destroyed? How do you answer your wife literally turning her back on you because of your faithfulness towards God? How do you answer those things? That is complex. And as human beings, we seek answers. We want a rational answer to an irrational moment. Right? And Job cannot get that. Job will not get that, as we'll find out later on. But we are in the midst of the story. Job cannot get that. The thing that we also see here is one thing that ties into the thread of who Job is. Job never curses God. Job curses himself. If you read through all 26 verses of that, Job never curses God. He is woefully, in some minds, consistent. Woefully consistent. Because if you're reading the story, there's a lot of things you can say against God right now. There's a lot of thoughts you can think about God. There's a lot of concerns you can have about God. And Job doesn't even know the dialogue that has happened that we read in 1 and 2. So could you imagine if Job had a preview of the Satan and God exchanging about the things that are going to befall him? Would he have been as consistent? We don't know. We read this into the text. What we do know is that Job has experienced everything that has been displayed to us in the text, and he never curses God in his despair in this text. He is far more valiant than I would perceive myself to be. How I would describe myself, someone has asked me, as a person who has experienced quite a bit of grief in my young life, one of my best friends asked me, are you angry with God? And I think that's a valid question to ask. 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now will mark 1 year since my dad died. And actually, I was here teaching adult form on the Sunday that he died. And I did not know that he had died. I didn't find out till the next day. Complicated relationship with my dad. My dad was mostly absent. I had not seen my dad, or let's say, not that I had not seen my dad, but I had not had an interaction longer than an hour with my dad in almost 30 years. And I'm 37 years old, 36 at the time. So I was literally on the other side of the room doing adult form, and did not know that, I believe, as I was teaching, my dad had died. I found out Monday evening that he had died. And yeah, I'm sharing life because we share life together, right? Whether we see each other 1 week or 1 day a week or not, I'm displaying my own personal humanity and saying that has been a complicated place to discern. There's two losses. There's a loss of identity with my dad, and there's a loss of what never was. And so my friend, who's known me, for quite a bit of time, my best friend, asked the question that good friends can ask. As we'll see bad examples of what happens later on, but he asked, "Are you angry with God?" Good question. Not everybody can ask me that question, right? He can. And I said, "No, I'm not angry with God. I'm perplexed by God. I'm perplexed. I'm not angry, but I don't quite understand." And so people approach grief in different ways, right? I have yet, and I say that to say, like, doesn't mean I will never not be angry with God. But in this kind of midst of chaos and suffering, I'm more so perplexed by God. Perplexed by the notions of God's understanding of time and life, and that God would allow those experiences that I experienced, or the lack thereof, with my father to define elements of my life, and then for that not to be reconciled and will never be answered in this life. That's a different kind of despair. That's a different kind of rumination. I could ruminate over that for the rest of my life if I choose to do that, and I will never get the answers on this side. Unless God directly speaks to me, maybe like he will speak to Job, but God hasn't yet. So there's this tension of the unknown of something that is very known. I know what happened. I don't know how to live with what happened. Job seems to suggest that he does not know how to live with what happened. And we can identify with elements of that, maybe at the deepest levels or at the periphery levels, if you have not experienced that kind of grief. He talks about, almost like in a fantasizing way, about the appeal of Sheol, the appeal of this place of the dead that is thought about in Hebrew thought, that he compares his present life to a non-existent life, right? That's an irrational display of grief. Job has lived. Job has experienced life. Job has present memories of life. But Job rather forfeit all that as if he did not exist. So there's two layers. I wish I was never born, and then I also want to deny what I actually have received since my birth. I want to reject every thought. The thought of death seems to be the only hope that Job has in his despair. We would call that what? I think someone brought that up. Suicidal ideation. I mean, we have our psychological terms to describe that. But Job seems to suggest that the only rest he will receive is in his own death. Suffering has literally taken over Job's life. It's consumed Job. It has alienated Job. It has cornered Job. How would you deal with the depth of despair as you read this 26 verses? How would you deal with it? Would you curse the day you were born? Would you seek the ground as your resting place? Would you rather be buried than alive? I've wrestled with death. I'm like, I don't want to die. I just, and then if I do die, I don't want any type of certain burial instructions. I don't want to be buried in the ground. Somehow in my mind, like in my fantasizing mind, am I going to wake up in the ground? No. I don't want to be cremated. You're going to put me through a fire? No, I don't want any of that. Like, I don't want to die and I don't want to experience the other and then I'm like, am I going to experience it? This is the shell of my body. But I have ruminated over that at my young age at 30, 31 years old. I don't want to go on the ground. You know, as a minister of the gospel, I have gone to more funerals than any ceremonial thing in my ministry. And I've seen countless times over and over again the remains of someone going to the ground, and it has never brought me any form of solace. It has never said, man, one day I want to be that. No, I don't want to die. I don't want to be buried. I don't want to be cremated. I want to be alive. So when I think about this, I cannot fully understand the complexity of wanting to be dead and the concept of Job. Has there been times where I did not want to live? Honestly, yes. I'd be a liar to say that. But I didn't want to die. You know, like I had this complexity, right? I did not want to live, but I didn't want to step into this mystery of dying. Death, the transaction of death, is a mystery. Even if we go into the New Testament and we have examples of resurrection, no one tells us what the transition between death and resurrection was like. We have no testimony from Lazarus about what was happening between his death and hearing the voice of Jesus say, "Come forth, Lazarus." So the portal to death and the experience of death is still mystery to us. Even we had examples of folks who were resurrected according to the Gospels. But they didn't do anything. They didn't write anything down. Come on, Lazarus, at least tell us what happened over those 4 days. So to want to enter into that mystery or to be non-existent is a different level of thinking that maybe such despair will bring. It's not to say that it's irrational. It's not to say that it's rational. It's to say that it's a depth of despair that one can only maybe realize in that despair. So I sit with the tension and the complexity of Job's lament. Verse 11, why did I not die at birth? He brings it up again. Come out of the womb and expired. Not only did I not die at birth, I wanted to come out as a stillborn baby. Not the stuff you hear preached at the pulpit, do you? Often. Right? Not the things that are tantalizing that you will want to walk away with on a Sunday morning. Why did I not die at birth? Come out from the womb and expire. Why did my mother, essentially, verse 12 suggests, why did my mother nurture me? Why didn't she let me die? So, dang, I was born. And then you have the gall to take care of me and let me live, nurse me, lay me upon your knees, care and comfort me. Sit with that for a minute. Not only do I want to die, but I would have rather somebody let me die and kill me. It says it again, verse 16. Or why was I not as a hidden stillborn child, as infants who never see the light? And I can imagine Job saying, you have almost tricked me, God, in some ways, right? To let me see some form of goodness. Light exposes, shows, clarifies. You let me see this, and then you thrust me into darkness. why did I even come out the womb alive for this to happen? I should have died before I was even born. Could you imagine someone saying that to you? How would you handle that? How are you doing today? Most of us say what? Good, fine, doing well. Yeah. What would it look like, right? Like, how are you doing today? Like, I wish my mother never gave birth to me, and if she did, I wish I was a stillborn. What would you do after that? Like, would you continue the conversation? Most of us would shriek.
I used to work in mental health, Daniel.
Yeah.
I was a administrative person, and the mental health, the center, the patients they came to the center where I worked. Oftentimes those two functions are separate. And after a few times, you kind of learn not to ask people how they were, but they would tell you. And if you asked a question, they would tell you how they were. And you did actually learn things to say, well, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wasn't a therapist. I couldn't have lengthy conversation. I could take them down a wrong path, so I couldn't go there. But you know, but yeah, what do you do when your friend is down in a hole? I'm glad you're still here.
Yeah.
And you matter to me.
Yep. Yeah. So clear, buddy.
And some things too, Daniel. In some of the conversations I've had with some folks through some difficult times, just acknowledging that it's okay to be angry with God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, buddy. Yeah. It's okay to be angry with God.
Not great if you stay angry for very long, but it's okay.
Right. Yeah, that's like anger can be thrown onto the ground, but for some time, if it gets too much root, right, it doesn't bear good fruit long term. Anger can bear good fruit. I think there's things we should be angry at, right? I'm angry at injustice. I'm angry at a number of things. And it can lead to good fruit. But I think to what you're saying, buddy, that insular anger without a outcome towards something that is for one's growth and for the growth of those around him can have dire consequences for one's soul, right? Like, and
yeah,
one's heart.
But if you use it to grow,
yeah,
it can be a great catalyst.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, buddy. Yeah, even in my roles working in higher ed, I had countless times I was on what's called the student care team, where weekly we would sit and just talk about what students were experiencing, from mental health crises to disciplinary actions. And you know, you learn how to process those things in ways that is still empathetic, but not something that you let rest and just layer upon yourself, because it could be a lot. You know, I sat in a classroom with a young student who had suicide ideation and stated something in the middle of class. And you know, I'm not a trained mental health professional, but I've gone through a number of trainings due to my roles in higher education. My office was right across from that classroom. And the professor and I have a relationship, and she knocked on my door and said, "Hey, very calmly, I've had a student who said this in my class right now. What do I do?" And there's two things I had to do. I had to call campus police just to ensure the student's safety. And then I sat down with him and I asked him some questions. I got to hear him and listen to him and see him de-escalate and realize that these people in this room, the class had already been dismissed. He was just in the room, me, him, and the professor. And that moment for him was just expressing. He just needed to say something that was similar to what Job is saying, right? Like, still pause to like ask like, like real questions like, do you have a weapon with you? Like, that's a question I had to ask. If you do have a weapon, do you have it here right now? So twofold question, like, what you said, is that something that you intend to do? And so yeah, the nature of what you're saying, Bunny, right? It's real life that individuals face. So we lift that up in the midst of Job's lament. Verse 20, I think in so many ways this chapter speaks for itself, right? But what do we do with someone who perpetually suffers? How do we think about this in the context of one who perpetually suffers? I don't want to lay examples out there because I don't want to impute what I believe maybe a perpetual suffering is. We've had many people who've done that at times without the voice of those who are suffering. To say to be disabled means to suffer is not necessarily what someone who has a disability would say, right? So even within that, or for someone who has wrestled with mental health struggles, see, these are questions to ask ourselves, right, as we're thinking through that, and maybe consistently wrestles with mental health struggles. Maybe they see that as a form of perpetual suffering. Does Job's experience play into how we can dialogue about suffering, all right, and the severity of it? Where does faith, I guess the question I would ask you too, where does faith and experience contradict? Where is Job's faith in this? And where's his experience in it? Are they contradictory? Are they pitted against each other? Can we define that? There are some traditions within, or some realms of traditions within our faith tradition that would say that if you don't hold some certain level of stamina, you don't have enough what? Faith. Or if you do something like this, do you have any faith? How dare you question suffering? God is God. Sometimes he allows some things. God allows some things. God doesn't allow some things, right? Don't let your faith be troubled by suffering. So I think a good question to ask ourselves, think about this in context and relationship to this, is where does faith and experience contradict? Does it contradict? Is it symbiotic? Can you both be suffering and faithful? Should your faith weaken when you suffer? Should it strengthen when you suffer? Because I've heard different opinions of that. Some people say, my faith grew stronger because I went through this thing. And then others say, my faith disintegrated because I went through the same thing.
Daniel, going back to a question that you posed earlier, is that what do you do or what do you say to someone that is suffering and experiencing some level of the suffering that Job is? This is a issue that I've struggled with because I have friends whose spouse has expressed that, well, very basically is, I cannot live much longer like this. I cannot live like this for, uh, or I am tired of living like this because they are suffering.
Yeah.
They are not suffering all of the calamities that Job is suffering, but they are pushed to their limit. And one of the things that one of the wives said is that it is a bunch of bullshit that God will not put more on you than you can stand.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so they are at the breaking point, and I have not yet, other than to listen and let him talk about it. I haven't come up with any advice or anything that I can think of that's comforting other than that I am here with you and be glad to talk about it. But yes, I would like some some hint as to what I could say that would help or comfort him or his lady. And they are Christian. They're good, sound Christians. I think they have a strong faith. But this is certainly rattling her faith.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. I'm glad that you can be present, first and foremost, right? An embodied example of physicality with no words, and sometimes with words that are clear and meant to be said. Uh, yeah. Um, one thing I think I've learned in both providing grief ministry in some way and experiencing personal griefs myself and seeing how people want to minister to me and my family in grief is to never equivocate grief with grief. Like there's no people have leaned in at times and said like, well, I've lost a parent before, so I know how it feels. Um, and at one level, I can understand that. But to what I mentioned, like, have you lost a parent who seemed to suggest they never loved you? Have you lost a parent that you didn't have a relationship with for 30 years? Did you lose a parent after years of hoping that reconciliation would come? So yes, in one sense, we both have lost a parent, but the nature of how one relates to that grief can be different across the same kind of portal of entry. Right? So yeah, I think to what you're saying, to lift to what you're saying, like when someone's at their wit's end, just say that I don't know if I could bear this anymore. The depth of what that bearing may be drastically different than what we can bear. And I think to one thing you also lifted up, the statement that God will not give you more than you can bear. And I know that has been stated many a times. Some ascribe it to scripture. It's not a scriptural statement. I think it's a positive affirmation that people hold, which I can understand. But let's look to the cross as an example, just a little segue. Jesus could not bear the cross, he died. He did bear the cross in one sense salvifically. But Jesus didn't supernaturally come off the cross with whole prints in his hands. Or the demonstration of bearing suffering we see at the cross. Jesus bore more than he could bear physically and also bore more than he should have physically.
He did
So,
too. He did too say that, "My Lord, why have you forsaken me?"
yeah, yeah. So even the crux of the Christian faith kind of dispels that notion, right? That is to say that compassionately, because there is a sense. I grew up in a tradition that would say that often, so I've experienced that too, and it's soothing, right? So like God's not going to put more on me, but I think what it points to that could be true is that God is able to sustain us in suffering, even though physically we may be unable to sustain it ourselves. Right? Like uh, to Job's example, where Job lost his 7 kids, Job cannot bring back to life his 7 kids. So I think he has more on him than he can bear, because most of us will be looking to restore the lives of our children. So that is a good example to lift up. A couple of other things, and then we'll end for today. Um, it's interesting, just some thoughts, that wisdom seems to contradict experience in Job's suffering. So Job kind of appeals to wisdom in some ways, but the passages preceding Job chapter 3 seem to suggest that Job has been acting in wisdom. And sometimes wisdom literature gives this kind of if then statement, right? Like, if you do these things, you will avoid these things. If you do, if you live this way will not happen. These things happen to the foolish. These things happen to the wise. But everything seems to suggest that Job was a wise man who lived in integrity, that was above reproach in some way. So wisdom seems to contradict the experience in Job's suffering, to which could, in some minds, seem to unravel this if-then life mentality. Right? So I can't believe that person died. They were so good. I've thought that, said that. What does that mean? What does that suggest? Can two things be true? Do both the just and the unjust die? Yes. Every day. So wisdom seems to, in this moment, contradict the experience of Job's suffering. It is also clear that the suffering by which Job describes is an undeserved suffering, right? Like not a merited suffering, back to the if-then statement, right? So it would be different if Job cursed me to my face. Could you imagine if the story was this? Job cursed God to his face, and God said, you know what? I'm going to bring calamity around you and around you. I'm going to bring personal suffering to you. That seems like a humanistic lens that we could read into it. You tick me off, I'm going to do something to you because I have power over you. But the story doesn't say that. The story consistently upholds Job's integrity, blamelessness, and a strong wind of suffering. So what do we do with that? There's a lot of, you're probably gonna hear me say, well, what do we do with that? A lot in this saga. The infliction was not caused by any of his personal actions, right? And I loved what our guide particularly said that I do believe is true. And I think we can end here when it comes to our time. There's so much more you could say. I have more questions, but and page 25, if you have the study guide, the last paragraph in page 25 says, ironically then, accusing God is an act of faith. Accusing God is an act of faith. I wrote, it's a bold step. I also said it's courageous. Because if we have an understanding of God's nature, or God's character rather, or God's characteristics, God has the ability to bring forth life. God also has the ability to end life. Somebody's pointing a gun at me, I'm probably gonna try to be compliant. That's just who Daniel Parham is. I might be ticked off after the solution has been de-escalated. I might have some anger, but if you point a gun at me, I'm probably gonna be compliant because I want my life. So if you want my wallet, you can have it. You want my car, you can have it. Those things could be replaced. There's something to suggest that at that moment, that individual has some sense of agency over my life. And all the other things cannot bring life to me. It's profound, right? Like I can enjoy a car till it's stolen. I can enjoy money until it's gone. I also can only enjoy life as long as life is living. I have to be alive to enjoy life. I can make more money. I can get another car. So the thing I'm not thinking in that moment is, I will fight I'll die for my car. I'm not thinking that. Me personally, I'm going to say, you can have my car and I will have my life. And that's a human to human exchange. So think of Job accusing God in some way of this calamity is a very bold act. And sign of faith, because it doesn't seem like Job believes that some divine retribution will become of him by saying such things. He states it. So something to be learned maybe within that. And I think also to end here, suffering can bring on a shift in your theology. Seems like we're seeing some theological shifting that's happening in Job. The beginning, not a deconstruction, maybe. Could say that. Maybe there's some things deconstructing in Job's mind as he's lamenting. But there's definitely some kind of theological shifting, wrestling that's happening that we're seeing on full display. So next week, we're jumping away from chapters 4, 5, and 6. We're going to jump into the answers to some of the dialogue that we're experiencing today in 6 and 7.
Chapter 6 and 7?
Chapter 6 and 7,
Of the
yes.
book.
Of the
Not the
book, I'm
Bible.
sorry, of the study guide. Chapter 6 and 7 is where we'll be landing at on next week. We'll be reading through, or have already read through, chapters 6 through the 21st verse of chapter 7. So I encourage you all. Also, feel free to continue to read through 4 and 5. We'll do a little bit of a brief summary there. I would encourage you to go through the entirety of it, but we're only going to really highlight 6 through 7. Any final questions, comments before I let you all go? Only 2 of us are here right now that actually have to walk over to Duke Chapel, so I don't want to capitalize the time. But yeah, any thoughts, comments, questions to reflect on that you think we should reflect on ahead of next week? All right. Well, I appreciate you all. Thank you. I will see you all next week. Those of you who are up in the mountains, enjoy your time, and hope to see you in person again soon. If not, I'll see you on Zoom, and we'll continue through this study together.
Thank you, Daniel. We should see you next week in
Okay.
the flesh.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.